Good morning and welcome to First Parish Unitarian Universalist of Chelmsford. We're a covenantal community gathered for worship, mutual care, and in service to the common good. And I'd like to extend a special welcome to anyone who might be visiting us for the first time. We're so glad you joined us today. You can learn more about us or contact us via our website, uuchelmsford.org, or you can email dre@uuchelmsford.org. I'm Reverend Ellen Spiro, and I'm leading the service today with Steve Zaki, our music director, Dolores Heredia Wood, our director of Lifespan Faith Formation. The Welcoming Congregation Committee will be leading our chalice lighting this morning. Aggie Brennan is running our worship tech, and Joan Coyne is our online chat host. If you wish to join in the online chat, you need to join our worship service via the YouTube link option on our website, and you have to be logged into your Google account. Due to the severity of the COVID numbers, we've moved worship attendance to online only for the month of January, and the COVID task force will reassess a return to multi-platform worship in February. Finally, we will have the social hour online after the service, hosted today by Elliot Mayer, and we'll provide a slide with a Zoom link at the end of the service if you want to go to that meeting. But now we will center ourselves with worship with Steve's music.
Martin Luther King Day, January 17th this year, marks the beginning of the UUA's 30 Days of Love. This special month ends on February 14th and is a time to celebrate the many ways that UUs express love in the world. Cornel West famously said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." So we begin with a day that honors the man who dreamt of a world where his dark-skinned children would be judged by the content of their character and not by the color of their skin. A world that over 50 years later we have still not achieved, as Ahmed Aubrey's family can testify. And yet, as Dr. King said in his famous "I Have a Dream" speech, the whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges. Siding with love and its public expression in justice is one of the ways we UUs can contribute to peace and healing in our country. 30 Days of Love ends on a day traditionally devoted to love, Valentine's Day. It falls 2 days after a day known since 1999 as Freedom to Marry Day, as in freedom to marry whomever you love, regardless of gender, sexual orientation, or expression or family structure. This year's 30 Days of Love will focus on Side with Love's 4 intersectional justice priorities: reproductive, gender, and LGBTQIA+ justice, democracy and voting rights, decriminalization and racial justice, and climate justice. Calvin Coolidge said, "We cannot do everything at once, but we can do something at once." Choose one thing you have the time and bandwidth to do, and do that. Doing something moves us forward. Google Side with Love, or pick an organization you know works in one of the 4 justice priorities that calls to you. We light the chalice today in honor of the light we can share with the world through justice to service and peace.
Thank you, Frances. That was lovely. And now I'd like to invite us into our covenant. I'll read it in English and Dolores will share it in Spanish. We, the members of First Parish, covenant together to sustain and strengthen our beloved community by honoring and celebrating the spirit of life, nurturing all souls in our search for truth and the sacred, caring and being present to one another in our joys and sorrows, bearing witness through service to justice and peace, and being good stewards of our congregation, our heritage, our Unitarian Universalist principles, and our earth.
Nosotros, los miembros de la primera parroquia de Chelmsford, convenimos juntos a sostener y fortalecer nuestra amada comunidad, honorando y celebrando el espíritu de la vida, nutriendo toda alma en búsqueda de la verdad y lo sagrado, cuidar y estar presentes al uno y el otro en nuestras alegrías y tristezas, dar testimonio mediante servicio a la justicia y la paz, y ser buenos cuidadores de nuestra congregación, nuestra herencia, nuestros principios unitario universalistas y la tierra.
Thank you. Our capacity to side with love, to live into our faith, to live into our covenant, is a direct result of what each of us is able to offer of our time, our talent, and our treasure, even when we are not together in person, in body. So much is happening behind the scenes. I have such gratitude for our lay leaders and volunteers and all the people who are keeping our congregation going during this pandemic. So I invite us now to enter into a time of gratitude. And if you would like to make a donation to First Parish, you can do so via our website, uuchelmsford.org. Thank you. I have two short ancient readings this morning, both from the Jewish tradition. First is Genesis chapter 18, verse 32. Abraham said, "May the Holy One not be angry, but let me speak just once more. What if only 10 of the righteous can be found there?" And the Holy One answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy the city." The second comes from the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 97b. The Rabbi Abiah said, "The world has no fewer than 36 righteous people in each generation who greet the divine presence." Our modern reading is an excerpt from an interview with the Archbishop Desmond Tutu by Krista Tippett for the podcast or the radio show On Being, April of 2010. Tippett asks, "Can you recall one of those early discoveries of the Bible as dynamite, some teaching that you suddenly saw as so relevant?" Tutu answers, "Well, actually, it's the very first thing. When you've discovered that apartheid sought to mislead people into believing that what gave value to human beings was a biological irrelevance, really, skin color or ethnicity, and you saw how the scriptures say it is because we are created in the image of God that each of us is a God carrier, that no matter what our physical circumstances may be, no matter how awful, no matter how deprived you could be, it doesn't take away from you this intrinsic worth." One saw just how significant it was. Although I was a bishop, I was now working for the Southern Council of Churches, and I had a small parish in Soweto. Most of my parishioners were domestic workers, not people who were very well educated, but I would say to them, "You know, Mama, when they ask you, 'Who are you?' You see, the white employer most frequently didn't use the person's name. They said the person's name was too difficult. And so most Africans, women would be called Annie, and most black men, really, you were boy." And I would say to them, when they ask, "Who are you?" you say, "Me? I'm a God carrier. I'm God's partner. I'm created in the image of God." And you could see those dear old ladies as they walked out of church on that occasion as if they were on cloud 9, you know? They walked with their backs slightly straighter. It was amazing. When I was a kid, my mom would often quote a Jewish proverb, which says that as long as there are 10 just or righteous persons walking the earth, the world cannot be destroyed. I did some research into this saying, and like much folk wisdom, it was a little hard to pin down. The 10 just persons, I believe, refers to the story in Genesis chapter 18, where Abraham is bargaining with God to save the city of Sodom. He begins by begging God not to destroy the city if 50 righteous people can be found. God grudgingly agrees, and Abraham eventually gets it down to 10 for God to agree to hold back God's hand. Unfortunately, 10 such people could not be found, and Sodom was destroyed. I want to note that the story of Sodom and Gomorrah has been used by various arms of the Christian church to justify homophobia. And I would just offer that the real sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was violence and the violation of a rule of hospitality. But that is another sermon for another time. But I do want to acknowledge the harm that this story has done. My dive into the proverb of the just persons brought me next to the Babylonian Talmud, a collection of teachings and stories written around the year 500 by Jewish rabbis and scholars exiled in Babylonia. And according to Rabbi Abaya, the number of righteous who must live in the world to keep it from destruction is 36. I was relieved to see this higher number, as it offers a little more breathing space for the rest of us. But before I go too far down the rabbit hole of Jewish mysticism, the reason I thought of this proverb in the first place was when I learned of the death of the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, the Archbishop of Cape Town and one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. He passed away on December 26th, and with his death, I realize we've lost one of these just persons. Be he one of 10 or one of 36, it's a huge loss, nonetheless. I listened to the podcast of Krista Tippett's 2010 interview on Being with the Archbishop, and I was struck by a couple of things. First, here was a man who grew up in the ghetto of a South African township under the rule of apartheid, extreme poverty, violence, and oppression. And after the end of apartheid and the emergence of a democratically elected government, he shepherded his country and his people through several years of a process of truth and reconciliation, where he listened again and again to terrible stories of the violence and horror people had suffered and that people had perpetuated. He witnessed how the move to democracy in South Africa didn't necessarily fix everything. It did not mean that there would not be corruption or violence or poverty. And while it is certainly much better than anything under apartheid, there have been difficult moments. He also witnessed a divide within his faith as the worldwide communion of the Anglican Church threatened to split on the issue of the equality of LGBTQIA+ individuals and communities. This was very personal for him, as his daughter, Impo Tutu, also an Anglican priest, has not been allowed to serve in South Africa because she married a woman, a relationship that the Archbishop and his wife Leah fully supported. And yet, Desmond Tutu was a man not only full of hope, but full of joy, full of playful humor. In his interview with Tippett, his deeply grounded faith in a loving God gave him an energy, a sense of humor, and a courageous, playful spirit that just shines. It can't help but uplift anyone listening. I found it at once inspiring and perplexing. How could someone who had to witness so much heartbreak and injustice, so much human evil, respond to life with such compassionate and hopeful intention. For Tutu's joy-filled spirit and his faith in God did not deny the realities of what he witnessed or his demands for justice. If anything, it clarified them. He chaired South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission from 1995 to 1998, where people came forward to share their stories of life under apartheid, be they the oppressed or the oppressors. And any oppressor or anybody who committed a violation of human rights who came to this commission and shared their story received amnesty. As I listened to what he learned, I heard both why he had this faith and also the hard path that he and his fellow citizens have to follow, a path that we are still struggling to learn in this country. 156 years after the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, almost 53 years after the death of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and just a year and a half after the death of George Floyd. Tutu noted that there is a wide gap between truth and reconciliation. In other words, acknowledging the truth of history, the truth of injustice and violence and oppression does not immediately bring us to reconciliation, to forgiveness, to healing, to overcoming the damage done by decades, even centuries. That's much harder work because it requires all of us to look inward as well as outward, to move, as he describes it, from fighting for freedom from, as in freedom from racism or poverty or violence, to freedom for. Tippett asks, so what is the freedom for? What, now that you wish for your people? And Tutu answers, we didn't struggle in order just to change the complexion of those who sit in the union buildings, their capital. It wasn't to change the complexion. It was to change the quality of our community, society. We wanted to see a society that was a compassionate society, a caring society, a society where you might not necessarily be madly rich, but you knew that you counted. We've got a number of things, sort of material political things, not all of them. I mean, we have levels of poverty at home that are unacceptable. There's crime, there's disease. We still do not, I think, have the kind of place where you say, I'm really proud to be here. I know that even when I don't have a big bank balance, I count, I matter. What we have found is that original sin doesn't actually know very much about racial discrimination. Original sin infects us all. I mean, when you see how soon people have become corrupt, it leaves you feeling sad. But I have to say, if you're devoid of hope, then roll over and disappear quietly. Hope says, man, hey, things will get better because God has intended it to be so. At no point will evil and injustice and oppression and all the negative things have the last word. And yes, there's no question about the reality of evil, of injustice, and of suffering. But at the center of this existence is a heart beating with love, that you and I and all of us are incredible. I mean, we are really remarkable things, that we are, as a matter of fact, made for goodness. And it's not just a smart aleck thing to say. It's just a fact, because all of us, even when we have degenerated, know that the wrong isn't what we should be, isn't what we should be doing, that we're fantastic. I mean, we're really amazing. When I heard Archbishop Tutu say this, I realized why he resonates with me so deeply. He's a universalist, with a small u. While Christianity is the tradition and the story through which he practices his faith, he understands God, or the source of life, does not belong to one people or one faith. As he told Tibet with regard to his faith and his friendship with the Dalai Lama. Do you really think that God would say, Dalai Lama, you're a really great guy, man? What a shame you're not a Christian? I somehow don't think so. I think God is just thrilled, because no faith, not even the Christian faith, can ever encompass God or even be able to communicate who God is. Only God can do that. Tutu believed truly that every person is a beloved child of God, and that God, or the most powerful presence or spirit in the world, is love, and that this love bends the moral arc of the universe toward justice, whether we can see it in the moment or not. That God, or whatever we call our source of being, intends for us to know that we are beloved and calls us to be beloved of each other. This faith called him to claim his humanity, his inherent worth and dignity that made apartheid a lie, but also required him to honor the inherent worth and dignity of all others, including those who perpetuated apartheid, to recognize the brokenness and failures in himself, as well as naming them all in others. We have moments in human history when we get a glimpse of what it would mean to live into this love as God, or the best of our humanity, intended. Like when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech, or when the Supreme Court upheld equal marriage, or when Yitzhak Rabin and Yasser Arafat signed a peace agreement, or when the Berlin Wall fell, or apartheid ended. But these moments of clarity and hope cannot be sustained by wishing. They require our continued commitment and trust, even in the face of inevitable failures, imperfections, and comings up short that will follow. Freedom from is only a first step. Freedom for is the longer walk. Archbishop Tutu's death leaves an opening for someone to step in to walk this earth as one of the just, the righteous, those who the Rabbi Abaya said walk the earth aware and alive to divine presence, who greet this larger spirit of love and embody it. Whether that number be 10 or 36 or 1,000 or just one, these souls are essential to our survival as a species. And here is the hopeful, delightful thing, as well as the hard and the challenging one. Maybe they are already among us, these just and righteous people. Or maybe they are us, as we make living in a more just, equitable, compassionate, and loving world our intention. Thank you, Steve. I invite us now to pause and center ourselves. Open our minds and our hearts and our spirits to our source of being, however we name or know that spirit of life and love and hope, of joy and beauty, of possibility and imagination, of courage. And as we gather from wherever we are, I invite us to live into that part of our covenant where we offer one another mutual care, presence to each other's joys and sorrows, as well as a bearing witness to our beautiful, broken, amazing world. The Rotting family asked me to share the news that Molly had a successful surgery and she is home and recovering well. And the family thanks us for our thoughts and prayers. Steve Zaki asked me to share that his mother, Julie, turned 86 yesterday. Happy birthday. I have several things to share from Jim Curley. First, that his daughter and her 2 sons all got COVID over the holidays, and it's a joy that the boys have recovered mostly well, with just symptoms for a couple of days, but he asked that we hold his daughter in our thoughts and prayers as her oxygen level is fluctuating from too low to almost okay to too much, so she's being watched. He's also happy to say that he and his wife June have remained COVID-free. Jim was also sharing a joy for the entire congregation, which is to say that all the capital campaign payments are now complete, and we enter 2022 with no further accounting activity needed by Cornerstone. And after a couple of end-of-year adjustments, the total pledged and collected for the renovation of our building was $673,411. And I would agree with what Jim says, that this congregation rocks. And I can't wait for us to be back in our building so we can enjoy the renovation again. I'd like to invite us now into a spirit of meditation or prayer or just quiet contemplation, whatever is your practice, as we hold the joys and concerns shared this morning, as we hold all of those on the front lines in our overwhelmed hospitals. The patients and their families who have had to put off care. And as we continue in this difficult time, to remember that, as Dr. King said, we are held in a network of mutuality. A garment of destiny. And to treat each other well is to treat our own selves well. To take care of each other and our neighbors and strangers is to take care of ourselves as well. Spirit of life and love, may we not forget this truth that has been taught to us and told to us for millennia. Amen, and blessed be. Thank you, choir. So as we prepare to enjoy the sunshine of this day before the next storm moves in, I offer these words adapted from Howard Thurman to send us forth into the world. In the quietness of this place, surrounded by the all-pervading presence of God, the Spirit of life, our source of being, may our hearts whisper, keep fresh before us the moments of our high resolve, that in fair weather or in foul, in good times or in tempests, in the days when the darkness and the foe are nameless or familiar, we may not forget that to which our lives are committed. Amen, and blessed be.